just like Michelangelo into the blue, on heavenly wings. Cargo ham bones don't take off, no smoke, no mirror, no strings. I can't take off these dark shades, I can only say how it's too beautiful. Our town on TV, our town, there's you and me, upside down hanging out of an airplane.
I'm delighted to be sitting in what used to be the 2nd District Courtroom, but is now part of the Amesbury Police Department, and I know that our Chief Mark Gagnon's office is to my left, as is the Lt Kevin Ouellet's office. This afternoon, I'm a lucky man to be sitting with our Lt Kevin Ouellet, our Chief Mark Gagnon, and retired police officer Ron Fournier. To get our discussion going this afternoon, I thought it might be nice to share a few nuggets of historical information that might prompt some discussion by you folks. I'm indebted to Margie Walker, who's one of the best historians in town at the Amesbury Public Library, and the information that she shared with me, I thought I'd share with our viewing public, at least pieces of it. I was interested to know that in 1915, the police station was headquartered in the town hall, with the jail located as you're facing the town hall, the bottom right-hand side, lower floor, and the dispatcher was right where the tax collector's office is today. At that time, the chief was William S. Rogers, and the captain was Fred J. Ives. In 1929, this current police station and at that time district court building was constructed with a completion of June of that year. There were at least 5 bids on the building, and the project ranged from a low of $34,088.50 to a high bid of $54,000, with the contract awarded to the low bidders, Paul B. and Edward W. Currier. I also thought this was interesting. On August 25th of 1941, there was a police bell placed outside of the telephone building, which at that point was the 2nd floor of the Fuller building, and upon receiving a night call for the police at the telephone office, the operator would call up the police station. If no one was there, the night bell would be sounded for the officers to respond. Then in 1951, the year I was born, the radio age began here at the Amesbury Police Department, with 4 mobile units purchased. Before then, a light would flash on a pole downtown indicating a problem, and I know that Officer Fournier, you talked about that in one of our previous discussions. You had told me that at that point in time there were 4 such lights strategically placed around town. Is that correct, Ron? Can you remember that?
Yes, that's correct. They were in the area of the post office, where the old post office is now. There was one on Friend Street in front of what was Albert's Pub, and that would be across from the Barking Dog. There was also a light down by Jack's Auto Parts. So from any given point, you could see the light on any part of the 2 walking beats. And there was also a call box right in Market Square in front of Locke's Jewelry.
Times have changed, haven't they? Incredible. On August 16th of 1967, I discovered that the police department was honored by the American Automobile Association for having 8 consecutive years with no traffic fatalities under then Chief McLaughlin. Then on September 10th of 1979, much to the chagrin of then Judge Louis Cyr, the 2nd District Court was asked to vacate the 2nd floor of the station due to space needs. However, due to a variety of circumstances, I'm told the court did not actually leave the building until 1991. Would that be the accurate information, Chief?
My understanding is that some notice was given to the court to vacate the building, and I think it had a lot to do with the county not paying rent for a long period of time. So then Chief Cronin initiated some actions to try to get that corrected, and to no avail. And talking with Chief Cronin recently, he told me a story of how at one point he actually went to court to have the court evicted, but they said there was no jurisdiction and that no court would get involved. So he took the upon himself to actually change the locks on the doors, and apparently the judge came to work the next morning and couldn't get in the building. So that ended up with the chief in court, and I think they politely told him that if he wanted to stay in out of jail himself, that he should let the court return and they'd work out another way. And that's what resulted in the direction of building the new court eventually, which ended up in Newburyport.
The real story. You heard it here, folks. I appreciate that. I know that renovations were made at the building entrance after the February 21st, 1982 stabbing of an officer. If I'm not mistaken, that officer was preparing to go off duty, and he was standing with 4 other officers at the front counter of the building, in the front hallway at that time. And those 4 officers actually were honored for bravery, for subduing the attacker. Do any one of you have any recollections of that sad event, but an event that certainly precipitated some necessary security changes in the building?
Yeah, in actuality, after Larry Streeter made sergeant, I was the senior sergeant, day shift sergeant. I was moved up to day shift. He actually took the shift that I would have been working. Had that been my shift, that could have been me. But naturally, once this occurred, it precipitated a sequence of events whereby the downstairs was more secured. They put in bulletproof glass. They made some changes to the communications area, restricted access to the desk officer in the desk area, just to prevent these kind of things from happening, because there was no protection. As they come in the door, there was a swinging gate, and somebody could just push through that swinging gate and you're right in the communications area of the station. So it was a wake-up call to everybody, and the security measures that resulted were as a result of him being injured and almost killed.
Well, no, certainly, having just been downstairs, it certainly is secure now. I think Amesbury is to be applauded on the level of response to that unfortunate incident. In my research, I also found that little nugget of information on April 15th of 1983, under Chief Michael Cronin, town meeting voted funds for a new radio system costing more than $51,000 at that point in time. So a lot has happened over the years here at the police station, and I'm wondering, I know both you, Lieutenant Ouellet, and you, Chief Gagnon, have done a fair amount of research, and you know a lot more than I would ever begin to know about the history of this station. And are there any nuggets of information that you would like to share with our viewing audience that they might find interesting?
Just getting back to where you had mentioned the communication system, back then we had 2 portables, and they were probably about 4 times larger than the portables we carry now. And those 2 radios were the only radios that went out onto the street prior to that grant being given for $51,000. So 2 portable radios, and not all officers had it. So when they left their cruiser to either go out into the woods or do motor vehicle stops, they had no communication with the station until they got back into their car and used their car radio. So there was a lot of officer safety involved in getting a new radio system within the station back in the 1980s. And as I said, I came back on as a reserve back in '82, so I remember carrying that big old radio back then. Technology.
What would we do without it? Just incredible. I thought something that would be enjoyable, I think, for each one of us and also for our viewing audience was to simply do a then and now. Because given what we've talked about thus far and what you've shared, so much has changed for the better. When we were downstairs and we were talking with your dispatcher on duty today, we talked briefly about the responsibilities around trainings. And I'm curious, as we think of the larger requirements for the police department around accreditation, would each one of you or one of you be willing to respond about accreditation? What are the responsibilities now versus what they might have been in the past?
I can touch upon it a little bit. Just a little historical aspect. In 1970, we found that the officers were required to go to the police academy at that time for 6 weeks. And that was a huge monumental event that upped the training to these unbelievable standards where prior to that there really was not a lot of formal training. So an act was passed through Congress and a law was passed and it mandated 6 weeks of training for all new police officers. Presently today we're up about 26 weeks of mandatory training, and that's just coming out of the academy. That's the basic recruit academy. Because of accreditation, we have a number of requirements that we have to make sure everything our officers do, they're trained for. They have to be trained to carry every single piece of equipment they carry. Obviously the firearm, but they have to be trained on the taser. They have to be trained on the baton, trained on the OC spray they carry, trained on handcuffing. And that has to happen yearly. They have to be recertified and documented and records kept. And that's critical to not only the accreditation process, but any potential litigation that could come down. And we've seen some great successes in that area because of the accreditation process requiring us to meet some very high standards in training and record keeping, and then making sure everyone's where they should be. It helps a lot when you do have someone who tries to sue the department, and then you can show that you did the right thing. And that also falls into the facility, having videotaping through the whole station. So if someone claims something happened, it's all on tape. We don't shut it off. It runs 24/7, and it's pretty much throughout the station where any citizen would come in.
It's extraordinary and ongoing professional development. This training isn't just a one-shot deal. It's forever. Am I correct?
Yes, and I can let Lieutenant Ouellet talk about that, the in-service training.
Exactly, yeah. The in-service training used to be, up to this year, was off campus, meaning we would go up to Lowell and get our training for 4 days a week every year, and they would give you updates on criminal laws. They would give you updates on officer safety, your first aid, and so forth. But this year the Commonwealth has not supported that, so there is no training. You have to do everything online. It's online base only. So we have now, unfortunately, brought our training in-house, where we have our schedule allows us to have 130 hours of training so that the officers are able to do the training in-house here at the station, hands-on, bringing instructors to us, or if not, we have our own instructors. So a lot has gone on as far as in-service, and we've kind of adapted to the new times of we don't have any money, you have to do it differently. I think we're a little bit ahead of the curve on that.
It's a good thing. And as we consider trainings, Officer Fournier, although you're retired, you're back on board. And if I'm not mistaken, training is a component of your new job. Would you like to talk a bit about that for us?
Yeah. As the firearms licensing officer, I attend biannual seminars. I'll be going to one actually the 17th of this month. It deals strictly with firearms licensing issues, changes in the laws which relate to this particular job. Also, we're very involved in an online internet site with the moderator of the website, who happens to be a retired police chief and teaches the seminars. This has been a great tool. It's assisted numerous police departments across the state. There'll be probably 220 officers at that seminar on the 17th, and we go over updates. We also have a good exchange of ideas and opinions, and it's a great way, a great tool of assisting every department who's on the network to deal with issues that come to them that might be unique to them but not to others.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, as far as that is concerned, I stay up to date. I get new manuals every year. The laws are changing, and we have to change with them. So this is the whole purpose of the in-service training for that.
It's a great segue. Speaking of change, and then and now, I'm thinking about technology. We're surrounded by technology and the impact of technology on our personal and professional lives. I know that here at the Amesbury Police Department, Officer Kevin Ouellet in particular has become quite skilled in terms of his technological expertise. But I wondered, Chief, if you'd be willing to talk briefly about technology and the huge role that it plays in your work on a daily basis.
Things have evolved drastically over the years. We now have computers, not only radios in our cruisers, but we have computers that are fully capable of performing functions in the cruiser that normally would only be able to be done inside the station. And previously weren't even capable, but now we can run all the information the officer needs on the street right from his cruiser. He can do license check, registration checks. He can communicate with dispatch. So there's just so much that can happen there. But we also have other equipment on board, just the equipment the officers carry. You know, we have rifles in the cruisers. You know, hate to think we have to use them, but you never know. So it's trying to stay safe today. So we make sure the officers are up to date on that equipment. But the officers carry equipment on their gun belts. They have the taser. It's a very effective tool, minimal or no harm to the person, as opposed to using a baton or some other impact device. And it keeps the officers from getting hurt, and it keeps the you know, our civilians from getting hurt when we have to, you know, have some kind of contact with them. Just inside the station, the things we do, the whole station's computerized. We all carry smartphones that we pay for on our own, but that allows us to get emails 24/7. So I am accessible 24/7. If a resident has a concern and they get on our website and they send an email to me, I'm answering those emails on Saturdays, on Sundays, and to their dismay sometimes they're a little surprised to hear back from someone that quick. But I will answer the resident. I'll forward it to the supervisor. The supervisor will have someone respond, and that issue that normally would have taken days to get resolved is dealt with almost instantly. So the technology has just come so far in everything we do here.
You know, though, what a great way to build confidence, knowing that there's that level of response should someone need to contact any one of you. It's very comforting. You talked a bit about the changes in equipment, the changes in what an officer might be required to carry today versus what he or she might have carried in the past. And similarly, if I'm not mistaken, there are also some changes in cruises, the ways in which cruises are outfitted. Could you talk a little bit about those most noticeable changes, maybe Lieutenant Ouellet?
I can, and maybe Sergeant Fournier could add in a little bit about maybe prior to 1980, how the cruises ran. I mean, when I first came in, we had a radio inside the cruiser, and you had a switch for turn on the blue lights, and sometimes the blue lights would work, sometimes they wouldn't. It was just a technology that, you know, that they weren't made for the weather. But today now, everything is solid state. So everything that's running there now, with the new light bulbs, LEDs. You have LED light bulbs that you can shut off your cruiser, and those lights can go on for an hour or two before you leave your cruiser. If your car's stalled, if those lights were running for a couple of minutes, you wouldn't be able to start your cruiser back up. So there's a lot of technological changes within the cruiser. Right now we have, it's almost like their office space. Once you get inside a cruiser, you do have a computer in front of you that talks to the station. That same computer, they can communicate back and forth. We have that AVL system that you saw downstairs that allows us to see where the cruisers are. That AVL system is there for the officer's safety. If you're anywhere within the continental United States, they're going to be able to find that cruiser. You leave the continental states, all right, it's going to be a little more difficult to find it on the map. But in any case, the technology within the cruisers for officer safety is also a huge benefit, where the designs of the cruisers are designed so that the officers are safer, whether they get hit by a car or whether or not it's just that the inside interior is designed for officer safety also. So a cruiser that you buy is not the same that you would get it from a personal vehicle.
Kind of a nice segue as we think about safety requirements for our officers. Could you talk briefly about the vest and seatbelt requirements that are in place today?
Sure. Several years ago, the town adopted a policy for all town employees that there's a mandatory seatbelt requirement, even for police officers, to wear whenever you're in the cruiser. And it also requires us to belt in any passengers we have. Even if an arrest is made, there's a special preformed plastic seat in the back, and it has a special accommodating seatbelt that's safe for the officer to engage around someone, but we can't even transport a prisoner or a guest to the station without the seatbelt on. Obviously, the cruisers are equipped with airbags and, you know, the most current brakes and everything else, but the vest policy, last year, the federal government and the state got together and they told us that if we're going to be eligible for any grant funding for bulletproof vests, we have to have a mandatory wear policy for all our officers. That means any officer on duty working regular patrol has to wear a vest all the time. And there's no exceptions, including the lieutenant and I. So the only exceptions, you know, if you have the flexibility when you're working out on the road on a traffic detail, but otherwise all the officers have to wear the vest, and otherwise the federal and state governments will not fund any of those purchases. The officers would be responsible. So it's a benefit to them in two ways. One is it pays for their vest, and two, it keeps them safe.
Very interesting. I'm curious to shift gears a moment and talk a little bit about the kinds of calls that we get here at the station today versus what the calls might have sounded like in the past. And I'm thinking again along the lines of technology. I'm wondering if you could speak briefly about some of the response to internet crime that you might be dealing with. I happen to be on the board of directors of the Jeannie Geiger Crisis Center, and I would imagine a fair number of phone calls, unfortunately, are specific to issues around domestic violence as well. So briefly, if you could talk about changes in phone calls that you receive, and a little bit about abuses of the internet.
Boy, Peter, we could spend a whole day talking about that. With the birth of computers and email and cell phones and smartphones and Facebook and Twitter, so much happens today that involves electronic communication. We did a talk at the schools 2 weeks ago on bullying. And 25, 30 years ago, bullying would have been talking about, you know, kids being polite to each other and courteous, and then it would end when they left school and went home. Well, today it never stops because those kids have phones, they have computers. So in the bullying regard, there's so much harm that can happen, and there's also so much trouble they can get in. But we are inundated with restraining order violations, harassment, you name it, stalking, all kinds of incidents that take place over the internet through email, through pictures being sent, people taking other people's identity, assuming other people's identity in emails and sending things out to hundreds and thousands of people, pretending they're someone else. And this is a real concern today. It keeps us busy, not even to mention the identity fraud that takes place. You know, we have people who live in town here who've never left the state, but somehow someone in another state on the other side of the country, in Texas or California, has used their credit card. And that was somehow, you know, obtained over the internet or through some means, and it makes it difficult for us to prosecute. And then we could get into the scams. A lot of folks fall for the scams, and some of them are done from other countries. There's plenty of scams from the country of Nigeria that are done through banking scams. You'll get a notice or an email saying, you know, this person, you won money in a lottery, you need to send them this much money so they can transfer the funds to you, they want your bank account, and those are things we really can't even follow. We don't have any kind of working relationship with some of the other countries, so, but it's endless. It does keep us very busy, and it encompasses just about all different kinds of crimes, not just domestics, but, you know, thefts and identity fraud and people assuming others' identities, and it really is endless, and you could spend a whole day talking about it.
It's amazing. I'm thinking of the professionalization of the police department. Well, I know certainly, Chief, we could spend probably days talking about internet-specific crimes and the different phone calls that you now receive that never would have been anticipated in the past, but it reminds me of how the position of police officer has become so professionalized. I'm reminded of a meeting we had a few weeks back where Officer Fournier was sharing the rules and regulations manual from the past, and then Officer Ouellet, the rules and regulations manual of today, 2012, and the difference between the two is profound. I mean, you talk about a picture being worth 1,000 words, but I wondered, Officer Fournier, if you could talk a bit about rules and regulations, the manual itself from the past, and then present day, maybe Lieutenant Ouellet could share the difference.
All right. We were fortunate enough that this document was found in the basement of the police station last week, I believe. And this first document here is the rules and regulations for government of the police department of the town of Amesbury, made by the Board of Selectmen in 1942. It encompasses about 12 pages, and it covers the duties, the functions of each rank and officer, and what their rules and regulations are, and what their responsibilities are. And when I began the job, ironically, 41 years ago today was my first day on the job.
Congratulations.
I was issued the updated rules and regulations of the Amesbury Police Department, and it was a small compilation, very similar to what was in the 42 version, but updated. And this was a total of 20 pages, and also encompassed, rules and regulations and duties and responsibilities by rank and by officer. So this is what I had to deal with 41 years ago. And now we jump ahead to 2012. And
Just like Michelangelo into the blue on heavenly wings. Cargo ham bones don't take off, no smoke, no mirror, no strings. I can't take off these dark shades, I can only say how it's too beautiful. Our town on TV, our town, there's you and me. upside down, hanging out of an airplane.